Hello everybody, this is your host, NW Jordan of ArchNation, and today we're going to be talking about Rhino for drafting. Let's get into it. This question is brought to you by Philibit over in the forum. His question is, does anyone use Rhino for drafting or know if upgraded drafting features are coming with Rhino 5 whenever it is actually coming out? I know it is not currently intended to be a full drafting program, but I like it way more than AutoCAD for its user friendliness and support community. Thanks. Before we get into the response questions, I will say that Rhino is a nice, robust program and set of tools. It's primarily used for 3D model making, conceptual mass making. You can also do high-end V-Ray or Penguin rendering, but CAD drafting is more on the lower end. Rhino is not really a drafting program, but it can be used for drafting via plugins, importation. The only thing that would be different would be the user interface from AutoCAD to Rhino, as well as the differentiation between the layer and the pen styles. So let's continue. We have a response here by NardDog. Hey Dylan, Rhino is a great and easy tool for line work, drawings, but in terms of drafting, you want to be careful what you mean by that. For students, it may just mean drawing an elevation with creative effort if you wanted to, and no real constraints on what the drawing should be, while in the professional world, Rhino is looked down upon as a drafting tool, which is debatable for reasons of potential disruption in workflow, compatibility, etc. But simply because it is not the conventional tool to use does not really focus on the standards, plotting layout, etc. of conventional CAD programs. But of course, there are workarounds. So to answer your question, yes, I do use it often for drafting, but remember, it is ultimately how you define a good workflow, output, etc. that determines if Rhino is a good tool to use. And yes, I do feel Rhino will continue to improve as a tool. Hopefully this helps. Yeah, Nard, I agree there. Rhino can be used in your workflow, but like you say, you have to be careful. Rhino isn't always compatible with SketchUp, Revit, AutoCAD to your liking. You may be able to import basic massing and drafting lines, but it may not be able to fully create a nice, solid, cohesive document set, which is your end goal. The student may come at Revit from the perspective of, I need to achieve this elevation and the line work from this elevation. The professional will come at Rhino from the perspective of, I need to obtain these document sets. I need to make my cover sheet, my sections, my elevations, my floor plans, my electrical documents, if that's a part of your scope, and more on top of the 3D model, which Revit is good for. Continuing on, he says, yes, and thanks. To explain further, I would like to ask about using Rhino as the primary drafting, modeling, rendering program, a BIM-less version of Revit, basically. Does anyone really use it to produce shop construction drawings with no other program involved? I don't know about that. That sounds pretty intensive. Kunal Gavaria comments and says, plenty of industrial product designers probably use Rhino for their drawings, but I haven't seen any architectural firms to use it for their entire process. Even studios that I've worked at where 3D data for their entire drawing set was extracted from Rhino, eventually through into CAD for sheets, layouts, and detailing. I'd be interested to find out if there is indeed any firm that uses it for A to Z in the architectural world. Going off of that, I have yet to work in a firm that exclusively and primarily uses Rhino. The firms that I worked for, their base was AutoCAD, being that they were a little bit more old school. AutoCAD was that buffer between the hand drafting and the 3D. It had limited 3D capabilities, but it gave you your construction set nice and tight. Now, Rhino has a hard time sometimes doing everything. It can do most of the things, but everything efficiently to where your team can handle it, your principal can handle it, and your clients can understand it, that's really hard to achieve. Axis KB comments saying, during undergrad, I never relied on Rhino for orthogonal drawings, etc. It was mainly used for modeling and extracting sections, exporting to AutoCAD for cleanup work before eventually exporting it to Illustrator. I was wondering if anyone had good experiences using Revit for modeling and CAD drawings. I've yet to learn it, but I feel I should soon. I almost agree with this 100%. When I was in school, a majority of my peers, this is how they would use Rhino. They wouldn't use it for orthogonal drawings per se, but they would use it for their 3D. If they need a section, if they need an elevation, they quickly knock it out in Rhino, so they have a majority of the 3D work so they can convert to line and then export to CAD for the final touch-ups. Now, to answer your question in regard to Revit from modeling to CAD drawings, I have used Revit for a firm's process from the beginning to the end, as in I had multiple projects where I stayed in Revit, whether this was from designing houses, dental offices, whether this was renovating business suites to, what was another good example? One time there was even a church. It can be used for a variety of circumstances to where you can get both your 3D and 2D very easily. EC Nal says you can indeed lay out sheets in Rhino to scale with viewports, etc. Line weights, line types, hatches are all supported in Rhino. Try the layout command if you haven't already. For a small project, residential, it is fine, but starts to slow down enough to become annoying when there are complex drawings, etc. Perhaps I need a better computer. Yeah, this is where I was talking about how a lot of designers that I've come across do the process of exporting from Rhino to AutoCAD to touch-up, but Rhino can be used for most of the process if you use it correctly. Full of it chimes back in and kind of pretty much bumps the thread now that 5 is out. NC Etchy chimes in saying, I use Rhino for all of our drawings from renders to design development through detailing, production drawings, shop drawings, and so on. Wow, that's pretty great. The drafting tools are great, and I prefer to use them over AutoCAD. I'm not a fan of the plot styles, pen styles, and Rhino gives you the ability to create layers with precise lines, and I prefer this control. Like someone else said, it comes down to workflow, and we are very integrated with Rhino, so it works well for us. We are sculptural and architectural atelier. If I was opening my own office for architecture only, I would use Rhino with plugins from V-Ray rendering, Grasshopper scripting, Visual Arc BIM, Kangaroo Physics, and Scan and Solve Engineering, and essentially have the entire workflow from conception to production and shop drawings covered. Now, this is where I was talking about how you can add plugins and more into Rhino. Like Rhino is really good for the designer who is good at modding, is good at modifying their programs and processes. Rhino is in a way a basic shell to which you can add components and other features on too. V-Ray, very high-end rendering, which is amazing if you haven't already seen. Grasshopper can be scripted and used to produce, let's say, complicated beam systems. It can help you produce a truss system, a steel beam system, and more. Visual Arc BIM, that's more of synergizing the various systems from your architectural to your mechanical, electrical. Kangaroo is for when you're working on physics. You don't really need physics that much in architecture. I mean, unless you're dealing with like, I don't know, canvas type structures, or simulations of like water and even airflow. I had a friend who did hundreds of water simulations through a site to determine how that water over time would affect the terrain. So you can do a lot with Rhino. Then he finished it up by saying, also, if you're not interested in traditional drafting, you can modify the OpenGL graphics to create custom line weight, line type schemes for drawings from 3D models. Wow, that's pretty great. I really didn't know you can do that. AFO chimes in saying, I fully believe that Rhino has 100% of AutoCAD's drafting functionality, but of course, no one uses it this way. So it interrupts workflow at most places. Shame, really. It's a great bit of software. The only thing that I will say is that even though VisArt plays well in Revit, I personally think that Revit is miles ahead in terms of development. GeoGem and Weaverbird help mend the gap a little bit, but not much. Nicholas, are there any resources, examples online about the OpenGL thing you mentioned? That sounds very interesting. The Corpian says, if you're creating design development and CDs, then Rhino might run into a few problems. It's one thing to create a proposal with Rhino. It's another thing to integrate Rhino's output with the workflow of consultants. Yeah, a lot of consultants work in AutoCAD or even Revit, preferably. There's some that do SketchUp, but AutoCAD and Revit is the base. Everyone else would use CAD, so whatever you give them will be in CAD, and then you will inherit their CAD drawings. If you want to use Rhino for the initial stages of the project, then move on to CAD or Revit. That could work. Otherwise, it won't be a good fit with industry standards. That and Rhino doesn't have nearly as many features for CAD management as AutoCAD, which is used for when things are getting complicated. Things like Lisp, eTransmit, and CAD format itself. Okay, talks about if you download a technical drawing plugin for Rhino, it has a setting to generate dashed and hidden lines in OpenGL, and I can give you the idea of basic modifications. Okay, from there, I'll be able to create my own OpenGL drawing schemes. So now when I right click on the viewport tab, in addition to wireframe, shaded, ghosted, x-ray, etc., I have hidden, technical, silhouette, presentation, and even have created custom GL settings for certain clients and projects. Wow, that's amazing. It is easier for me to say that a silhouette edge line will always be X weight no matter what layer it's on. It is easier for me to say that a silhouette edge will always be X weight no matter what layer it is on than having to make all lines describing the edge of the object of a certain layer or line type. This also lets you create amazing 2D line style drawings without using the make 2D command. I used to use the make 2D command a lot. And set up 4 view sheets where all the views automatically update because they are showing a model, not a line drawing of a model. See, that's how I use Revit. You use Revit in a way to where you create the 3D model, and then every time you change your view, or rather you have views set to a side of the model, and this way as you're creating the 3D, it automatically updates. Now, I think that's it for the most part today, and hopefully you got a little bit better understanding for when you should and shouldn't be using Rhino. Remember, Rhino is a great 3D software that can help you in your architectural process, but is mainly used for 3D and can be used for 2D if you do so wish it to be. Now, Rhino, once again, can be used for your 2D documentation if you modify it. There are commands like the make 2D command that can help alleviate that stress, but you do want the more robust plugins and systems to help you. Now, if I had to choose between Rhino, AutoCAD, and Revit, I personally recommend Revit because it will give you more information at the end of the day. So until next time, make sure you like, upvote, subscribe, follow, and support ArchNation. I really thank you for all your time and support that you've given me. And until next time, my friends, this is Nation signing out.